Today we come to join to speak about the Trump administration and what we can do as a community to protect Californians who may be vulnerable to an aggressive Trump agenda. We have a robust agenda today. We have some leaders from both the national and state ACLU organizations. We also have members of the California Black Legislative Caucus here today. We will be taking questions at the end of each segment. Throughout the program, we will have some of our lobbyists here from ACLU California Action to speak about bills that they are presenting this year that we think may help protect Black and African American communities, and actions that we think the governor and the Attorney General can take as well that may also protect our communities from the aggressive federal agenda. Without further me going on and on, I have the pleasure of introducing a senator who needs no introduction. She's the chair of the Black Legislative Caucus, Dr. Akilah Weber. She's going to let us, she's brought us here today. She's going to welcome us. She does have to go back to a budget hearing, so she'll be here briefly. And without further ado, Dr. Weber. Thank you.
For that introduction, and thank you all so much for being here today. Want to definitely thank the ACLU for partnering with the California Legislative Black Caucus on putting this on. You know, we are entering very uncertain times. I think many people had an idea of what we were going into, and then January 20th hit, and we were just bombarded with all of these 100+ executive orders, oftentimes impacting the most vulnerable in our nation. And so it is extremely important that at this time, we don't get so discouraged and disheartened that we just give up, that we actually use this as an opportunity to prepare, to learn as much as we can, to fight back as much as we can, to build up our communities and our people as much as we can, so that in the future it doesn't really matter who's in office. We know that everyone here, not only in the state of California, but in this great nation, will be taken care of equitably. So thank you so much to the ACLU. Remember, it takes a village, and it is a village that will ultimately help out the most vulnerable of us, and that is why we are here to learn what we must do, not only today, but to continue to do in the future. As stated, I do apologize, I have to step out. Everybody's heard of the wildfires in LA, and so we have our special budget hearing on the Senate going on about that right now. But I have lots of staff here so that we from the California Legislative Black Caucus know how we partner with organizations like the ACLU to ensure that Black Californians and all Californians will be okay during very uncertain times. It gives me great honor to introduce someone who truly needs no introduction. Our Secretary of State, I'm glad my name is now Weber Pearson, so when people say Dr. Weber Pearson, they know it's me, versus our next speaker, which is our Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber.
I want to thank Dr. Weber Pearson for changing her name. No. So we don't get confused. But I want to thank the ACLU for being here. You've always been a partner of mine. We've partnered on some very difficult legislation, very impactful legislation. And that's good, because I have great confidence in the fact that you will continue the battle that we're in right now. I want to thank those of you who've come, thank the Black Caucus, the chair of the Black Caucus, and members of the caucus. This is the beginning of a journey, and I want people to understand that this is not a quick flash in the pan kind of issue. There will be lots of issues. We will hear a new one probably every day, but we should be prepared to understand what we've done, where we are, and how we need to move forward. I had no idea when I became Secretary of State that I would be fighting the same battles my family fought, my parents fought in the South with the right to vote, and having to make sure that everyone had a chance to vote, and did it without being encumbered with small things that became big things that limited people's ability to express themselves. And so knowing that you come from that kind of legacy, you're prepared. If you pay attention to your history, you pay attention to what people have done, you know that this is not something new. Most of us are not that shocked, and we know how to fight. We know how to stand on the laws that we have. We know how to educate our communities, and we have generations and generations of people who march, who protest, who who stood for what was right and just. So this is just a matter of fact that it's now your time, that you rested on the laurels of all of our ancestors and the legacy that they had in all the civil rights movements and the things that took place. Now it is your time to do your part and to make them proud. So I want to thank the ACLU for being here. Thank you for the information. Thank the Congressional Black Caucus and all of those who understand what our journey is about. And it's about the future, our children, and what we must do. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. So as is what you speak, I would like to next introduce our Executive Director at Cal Action, Mr. David Trujillo. David has been a political strategist for 20 years. He also is a political advocate. He's now here at Cal Action. He's going to speak a little bit about our mission, our goals, and just kind of address the crowd about where we go from here. Without further ado, David Trujillo.
I guess I do need an introduction, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the California Legislative Black Caucus for co-hosting with us and having us here. You know, a lot of the issues Dr. Weber just mentioned are so true, and they are what has been giving me hope and what has been keeping me going, right? So on Monday, President Trump had his say. On Tuesday, yesterday, we had our response here, right, including the ACLU filing 2 lawsuits already challenging some of his executive orders. And that work continues. And to Dr. Weber's point, we sit on the laurels of our ancestors, of the hard work that they did, and we got to continue that fight, right? This is the civil rights fight of our lifetimes, and we are the civil rights leaders. The time is now to stand up and to lead. And the ACLU sued the Trump administration over 434 times, or exactly 434 times during his first administration. Like I said, we already have 2 under the belt for this administration. We're going to continue to be there, but we're also going to be showing up at the State House, right? We're going to be in the Capitol as ACLU California Action. There are 3 ACLU affiliates in California. ACLU San Diego and Imperial Counties, ACLU Southern California, and ACLU Northern California. And ACLU Cal Action takes the policy agenda and goals of the 3 affiliates and implements it here in Sacramento. We have partnered with many of you and look to continue to do so in the coming years. We know it's not going to be easy, but this is what the ACLU was made for over 100 years and across many administrations. We have held our presidents and legislators accountable to the highest ideals of what our country was founded for. And we have dared them to work with all of us to build a more perfect union. We're going to continue to dare them to work with us to build a more perfect union. And that has to start here in California. The president talked about golden age. We're not fooled by those gilded policies, right? We know that his policies are intended to benefit the wealthy at the expense of working class citizens. And so we're not fooled by that. And we need to lean into our California values now more than ever to make sure that we are protecting our families, keeping communities together, keeping families together, making sure that we're protecting our digital privacy, protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community, especially trans youth, and that we are setting a forward vision. It's not just about reacting and fighting. We can't win if we're just fighting against the deluge of policies that are going to come our way that are going to be harmful. We need to be proactive in advancing a vision, and that's what ACLU Cal Action is going to be here for. We're going to have plenty of reactive work to do. We are ready for that. We have spent more than a year planning for this very moment. We are ready. The ACLU is here to fight. We've always been here to fight, and this is what we're made of, right? And so we're not afraid. We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep advancing our values. It's my pleasure now to introduce our Chief Political and Advocacy Officer, Deirdre Schiffling, who will talk about our national work at the ACLU before we turn it over to the local work that we're going to be doing, or the statewide work we're going to be doing on those issues. So Deirdre, please.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today and representing the national ACLU and the work that we're doing in this moment to fight back against what the Trump administration is doing and planning. First, I just want to say, to follow up a little bit on what David just shared, we have filed 2 lawsuits just hours after he issued his executive order to end birthright citizenship, which of course is in the Constitution. We filed a lawsuit alongside a number of other organizations to challenge that. Soon after that, we saw 22 attorneys general, including Attorney General Bonta, also file a suit, so that is great, and we're excited to work together to challenge that challenge to the Constitution. Also, on day 1, our attorneys asked a federal court to hold an immediate hearing on the Trump administration's abrupt shutdown of CBP-1, which is the mobile app. That was the last and final way for people to seek asylum at the southern border. Seeking asylum is a right, and we'd already filed a lawsuit challenging the Biden administration and their actions to shut down, close down access to asylum. So that suit continues with the challenge to the CBP-1 shutdown. And then finally, we have just now challenged today, breaking news, the expedited removal provisions that the Trump administration is putting in place. This would basically remove due process from the immigration enforcement actions. So removing due process, which is, of course, not legal. So all of this, this is gonna be like whack-a-mole. They're doing shock and awe. We have to be ready to stay focused, stay calm, and use the tools that we have to fight back. And that's exactly what we're gonna do. One more piece on the national level. Much of how the Trump administration is directing Department of Justice and other agencies is outside the law. So they're directing them to go after local officials, they're directing them to withhold resources, really to bully local elected officials into doing what they want outside of what their legal authority is to do so. And so that kind of abuse of power is another area that we are gonna fight tooth and nail. And we need California to stand with us to do so, and I know that you are and that you will. As the biggest state, as the strongest state, your leadership and standing up to that kind of bullying, demonstrating that you're not going to be intimidated by the Trump administration is going to be critical to providing the cover, providing the courage for other states to follow suit. So we're really counting on you. That's why I'm here alongside my incredible ACLU of California partners to really urge you to do everything that you can do to stand up and sort of lead the way in this moment. So thank you, and I look forward to partnering with you and more to come.
Thank you, Deidre. So on the state level, we have 4 different issues that we'll be discussing. We have our lobbyists here to discuss the bills that we think are the most important this year. They'll talk about how these bills affect both the African American community and vulnerable Californians altogether. The first lobbyist is George Pamela-Matthew. He is going to speak about the Firewall for Freedom Act. And without further ado, I have George.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Michael noted, but after each of the bill presentations, there'll be time for questions. So if I say something confusing, let me know. I'll be talking about the California Firewall for Freedom Act. The overarching goal of the act is to keep California's information in California to keep Trump out. So the first question is, who is Trump going after? Now this list is pretty long, but the first one is people seeking and performing reproductive care and gender-affirming care. I'll just note that 40% of the people who are seeking abortions in the country are Black, and nearly 1 in 5 trans Californians are Black. As we saw with Trump's recent executive orders, he's going to continue his vicious attack against the 10.5 million immigrants in California. Third, we know Trump has never liked any of the 2.8 million union workers in California who are brave enough to stand up to demand their rights. Relatedly, fourth, Trump has a long history of being hostile toward anybody who speaks out against any form of oppression, whether that be racial justice, police accountability, reparations, environmental justice, you name it, Trump hates it. Not to mention the fact that Trump is going to go after everybody who's not listed on this, who he thinks is going to be politically advantageous going forward, including what he calls leftist lunatics, which is all of us in this room. To come after me, you, or the kid down the street, Trump needs our information. And so right now, there are two major cracks in our digital defenses that he will exploit. The first, which many of you might be familiar with, is the fact that the Information Practices Act of 1977 has some gaps in it. The second, which a lot of people are not familiar with, is that California runs 6 fusion centers. These things are spying on all of us, and I'll get back to that in a second. But first, starting with the IPA. The IPA is a 50-year-old privacy law that applies common sense privacy rules to how state agencies deal with our personal information. This law does not apply to local government. So all that information held by local government is not covered by these privacy rules and is vulnerable to exploitation. Most concerningly is all that data held by local police departments and county health departments. We know that if people are afraid to go to the hospital or afraid to go to their doctor, go to the police, because I think they might get swept up in one of Trump's schemes, and nobody wins in community stuff. Turning to those pesky fusion centers, these things are black box information sharing and gathering sites between the federal, state, and local government. As we speak, these centers are automatically making available millions of records about who we are, where we go, what we do, who we spend time with, to the Trump administration, and to out-of-state actors like Texas. When a subcommittee of the U.S. Senate looked into these things, they found that it was a regular problem for fusion centers to track innocent activity. For example, we know fusion centers have surveilled Black Lives Matter activists, abortion activists, labor movements, and things as simple as a Muslim guy going to the mosque to give a talk on good parenting. He was tagged as the target. I'll just note where these things are. There are 6 of them in California. I wish that map was a little bigger, my bad. There's one in San Diego, one in LA, one in San Francisco. One in San Diego, one in Orange County, one in LA, one in San Francisco, and 2 in Sacramento. There's 2 in Sacramento because there's one state-level fusion center and one regional fusion center. As long as the Trump administration has access to these records, it is impossible to feel safe or free. And so the California Firewall Freedom Act will try to close both those gaps by doing 3 main things. The first is to modernize the 50-year-old IPA so that it finally applies to local government, so that we have a uniform shield over our information no matter where you are in the state. The second is to finally say that fusion centers cannot share our personal information outside of the state, whether that be the Trump administration, or Florida, or Texas. And finally, the act will give the Attorney General some oversight provisions to ensure that government information sharing practices are safe. And so I know that was a lot, so I'll open up to questions now, but I also look forward to your support of the California Firewall Freedom Act. Any questions? Yeah.
In the best interest of the state, with Trump, doing all this, and should the state resist any of this, he possibly could hold funding back from the state. Have you been prepared to address those issues should he try those tactics?
Yeah, so one of the questions we looked at is, if this act was enacted, are there any federal funds that require information sharing that might get cut off by this act? The vast majority of federal funds that we receive are for healthcare programs. 75% of the federal funds California benefits from are for our healthcare programs. Those currently funneled through state agencies. Those will not be affected by this bill. The most likely pot of money that would get affected is the money that fusion centers are getting directly from the federal government. We don't know what those agreements actually look like because, as I said, these are completely black box operations. But it is very likely that the Department of Homeland Security is only giving those grants with the condition that these fusion centers are sending data back to them. That said, those federal monies only make up about a third of what's funding these fusion centers. These are state and local entities funded by state and local dollars, and they're controlled by state and local law. And so we don't have any reason to believe there's any substantial risk posed to federal funds other than those directly going to fusion centers.
Well, is there a backup plan for those, in case those fundings are held up? Does the state have enough to sufficiently, carry out their duties?
Yeah, I think part of the problem with trying to answer that question is that we don't know just how much money is going to these fusion centers. One thing I'll highlight when I say black box information sharing and gathering centers, I really mean black box. If you take the phrase fusion center and look it up in the California code, it does not come up. If you look up state threat assessment center, which is the state level fusion center, it shows up once in the California code. And it doesn't describe what the center is, it just labels it as part of some other program. I think it's a cybersecurity program. At the same time, you might ask, how much money is the state threat assessment center getting? If you open up the state's budget documents, OES has a grant program that makes up about 90% of its funding. The State Threat Assessment Center falls under that grant program, but we don't know. Are they getting 2% of the money? Are they getting 5% of the money? Are they getting 50% of the money? Nobody knows. And I can only find one state document that acknowledged the presence of the 5 regional centers. And same there, that document acknowledged that they were getting $10 million worth of federal funds, but the very next line mentioned a grant program in the range of about $120 million. And at least one fusion center acknowledges getting money from that second pot. So, are the fusion centers getting $10 million? Or are they getting $130 million? What other pots of money do they have their hands in? We don't know, so it's hard to answer that question. But I would say that, if you cut fusion centers off from sharing information outside the state, they have less to do, they have less need for money. And so, hopefully, the state wouldn't have to backfill anything. Any other questions? Seeing none.
Thank you, George. Fusion centers are a scary business. They're the new age sovereignty commissions, if you will. So we are going to try to do what we can to protect our information. So if you do need any more information about that, George is available in leading that project. Our next speaker is Aubrey Rodriguez. Aubrey's going to talk about some of the mass deportation agenda that the Trump administration has already put out there. And with him will be Cynthia Valencia as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cynthia Valencia. I do legislative advocacy focusing on immigration work. And first, we want to address many things that Deirdre brought up, that the Trump administration has made it very clear that one of their largest agendas is to attack our immigrant communities and use the wholesale government to increase their immigration enforcement. So there is a lot that we can do in California to further protect our immigrant communities. For this presentation, we're going to go a little bit into legislation that we already have passed, and then also discuss the gaps that we have seen in the past, decades, but also in the past 7-8 years since the first Trump administration, the lessons that we have learned, and what we're seeking to do to protect those vulnerable communities here in California. So firstly, one of the first bills that we passed was the Trust Act back in 2013. So that was just setting a very minimum standard across the state to limit cruel and costly immigration hold requests in local jails. This is just a way that local entities were facilitating deportation and detention of immigrant communities, which is something that we've been trying to limit in our state, and we know that California really supports this type of policy. Another step forward that we took after we passed the Trust Act was then the Truth Act, which was to give more ability for people who were incarcerated or in local jails about their rights. So when ICE would put a request or a detainer, that they had declined the interviews when they were there, and it was the responsibility of the local law enforcement agencies to inform people about their rights. So these are things that we were able to do in California before the first Trump administration. And then the biggest bill that we were able to move forward in terms of our immigrants' rights work in California was the California Values Act, which passed in 2017 and was introduced essentially right after Trump was elected in 2016. And we tried to pass a very comprehensive bill that would completely limit state and local resources being used to facilitate deportations, but also just interactions with ICE and information sharing with immigration and enforcement. Unfortunately, that was not through amendments and negotiations. It wasn't as expansive as we would have liked, but it has been very helpful in ensuring that we protect some of our most vulnerable communities here in California. So since then, we've tried to pass more legislation, which many members of this caucus have been extremely supportive of, and have been amazing partners in making sure that these move forward. So attempts that we tried to correct some of the gaps from the California Values Act that passed in 2017 were first the Vision Act, which was introduced in 2021. One of the major carve-outs that was taken out of the California Values Act was a major state agency, which was the CDCR, and they were exempted from having to follow some of the protections. So unfortunately, we were able to get a lot of support for this bill, but in the second year, when it was in the legislature, we were literally 3 Senate votes short from being able to pass it. Then, in 2022, we introduced the HOME Act, which was a narrowed down version to address some of the concerns that people had the first time around. We had a supermajority of votes in both houses. We had no opposition, and unfortunately, it was vetoed. So we've had an uphill battle with a lot of our advocacy that we've been doing to protect our immigrant communities in California. And now that we have another Trump administration, one that has made it clear that they plan to militarize as many agencies as possible to participate in the enforcement of immigration, one that we know that when people get entangled with law enforcement, especially local law enforcement, that they want to then proceed to working with ICE and DHS. This is something that we think we can protect our communities in California, that we can stand up to this administration's dragnet, and we're looking to our leaders in California to move this forward and help protect some of the most vulnerable communities. So I'm going to then, this is background and we'll answer questions, but I'm going to pass it over to Aubrey, who's going to talk about the work that we're trying to move forward to address this.
Hi everyone, my name is Aubrey Rodriguez. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a ledge advocate with ACLU Cal Action. So I kind of want to start kind of what the lay of the land is nationally. Oregon is ahead of California. We're the first one to pass significant reform with the Values Act to help protect vulnerable communities here in California, but we don't have the strongest reform in the nation. Oregon does, right above us, our neighbors north of us. So they have the strongest sanctuary law in the nation, and they basically prohibit any law enforcement and all public entities, state and local, from participating directly or indirectly in immigration enforcement, and without a judicial warrant. So if there is a judicial warrant, obviously we do have to conform or abide by that. We can't create laws because we are preempted on that front. But that is Oregon's law right now. And they first became a sanctuary state, sanctuary state back almost nearly 40 years now. This law was passed in 2021, just a few years ago. So the question is, what can we do here in California and our legislature in the Capitol here? We can champion a very similar proposal to Oregon, as this is within the state's rights to do so, and just completely prohibit any state or local entity from colluding with ICE. You know, we have to kind of also further our values, which we did start with the Values Act in 2017, and basically commit to not using any of our resources to carry out Trump's cruel and racist immigration plan for mass deportations. And as we've seen with the recent raids in Kern County, the border, they feel more emboldened to kind of carry out that mission. So we just want to kind of remind everyone in this caucus and in the legislature that we have to meet this moment of terror with courage and pass legislation that protects all Californians. And we really hope that you can encourage your colleagues, staff, you can make those recommendations to your members that you work for to make sure that, again, we are leading on this front because we are home to the largest immigrant population in the nation by far. We have a lot of immigrant neighbors and community members here. So, questions? Or questions? So we have Ava, our senior staff attorney, that's visiting us from SoCal, that could also answer questions that people may have. But yeah, we're really happy to take any if anyone has some.
I apologize for being late. Loyal Terry here on the leader at We Are Curry. We've been seeing recent reports about what retaliation will look like for states that strengthen their protections for undocumented people that are just immigrants here, even if they did come with documentation. How do we both predict our existing laws will be under threat? And to your point about expanding upon that to match Oregon, I imagine that we would see swift attempts by the Trump administration to combat anything public that we do. What plan do we have for that or recommendation from ACLU?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2018, Jeff Sessions, the former AG under Trump, actually did target us and sued California for the Values Act. That went through the process. Ninth Circuit ruled it was constitutional, and the Supreme Court actually refused to hear it, so it upheld the Ninth Circuit ruling. So we already know that's constitutional. They'll likely challenge again. They might target Oregon's law. That's kind of yet to be seen. I know Pam Bondi is getting confirmed, likely to be confirmed, so we'll kind of see what happens with that front. But I would say that we're already a target, right? Even if we don't move this bill forward, we've seen with the Kern County raids that they are targeting California. I think Trump committed to having raids in Chicago, right, and during his inauguration, and I'm sure California is on that list. And I don't know whether we push this bill forward, it's gonna make us a bigger target or not. I mean, we're definitely a target, but we just need to kind of make sure that we don't use any of our taxpayer dollars, our resources, to kind of carry out that racist plan, right? And that California can exercise its authority to say, not here in the state, we don't want any penny to go to family separation or toward this agenda. So that's what we're hoping to do with this legislation. And I don't know, Ava or Cynthia, you want to add anything?
No, the only thing I'll add is we understand, I think I'm forward. Sorry.
Plenty of change.
Yeah, Ava Mitran, she, her, I'm the Immigrant Rights Director and Senior Staff Attorney at ACLU of Southern California. I'll just add that we already know we're a target. Also, I took your question also to mean with respect to the threats to withhold funding, right? And we know that we've been the #1 boogeyman for this administration from the campaign, from the get-go. Our laws, although the Supreme Court has said California can control what it does with California dollars and it can choose to opt out of the deportation machine, right? We know that that doesn't matter to this president and that the threats are coming. So if the threats are coming anyway, we might as well stand together and stand up for our immigrant neighbors and make the law as protective as possible because they're coming for us whether we pass this bill or not.
Any other questions? Yes. Mike.
I'm wondering if more broadly you can talk about what are folks saying about the sort of expansiveness of executive order power. Like I've been reading about the birthright immigration discussion, and that's an executive order potentially reinterpreting a constitutional amendment. I know we have expanded presidential powers over time, but wondering kind of if there's anything you can share about the expansiveness of this and where are some of the limits?
Yeah, happy to speak on that as well. So we know that this executive order is blatantly unconstitutional, right? It targets the exact language of the 14th Amendment. In fact, one of the Reconstruction Amendments, right? Designed to make Black people who were formerly enslaved citizens of this country. And we know that's not by accident. We know it's part of the racist agenda of this administration, right? Luckily, you cannot overrule the Constitution by executive action, no matter how expansively those powers are read. The Constitution says what it says. This executive order itself gives 30 days before even going into advance because this administration knows it's going to be challenged and that it is blatantly unconstitutional. And again, it is in that way a value statement, a mission statement from the administration that we have to meet with the full force of our values and mission statement. And the other thing I'll say on this point is just the flurry of executive orders is designed to stress us out and confuse us, right? And we need to maintain that mission clarity to say, this is the expanse of California law, this is how we protect our people. We're not gonna get thrown, of course, yes, we'll challenge the individual unconstitutional actions as we can, but we can't let ourselves be thrown astray or be confused by this expansion, as you call it. Yeah.
The Supreme Court right now is extremely conservative, 6-3. Aren't you kind of concerned that maybe they would side with these Trump policies that's coming forward?
You know, I can't tell you the answer is no, right? We've seen the Supreme Court craft law wholesale and make exceptions for this specific president in the immunity doctrine, so I can't stand up here with a straight face and tell you the risk is zero, but we do know that a constitutional amendment, plain as day, is the strongest protection you can have for birthright citizenship, and I would be surprised, let's put it that way, if even this Supreme Court decided to undo the Reconstruction Amendments based on one executive order. That's me speaking in my personal capacity. I don't know that the ACLU has a position on how likely it is for the Supreme Court to say a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, yeah, we view this as Trump pushing the envelope more than Trump actually thinking this will be successful. In fact, we're surprised that he actually went through with it. There are 38 EOs that he bombarded us with. A bunch of them are essentially message bills. And I would interpret this as kind of a message bill. Of course, we have to sue it and we have to see it through, but like, I would be shocked if they think that this is actually gonna be upheld because it's so patently illegal. So I think it's part of their, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like they're trying to intimidate us, they're trying to shock and awe, and we have to stay steady, stay calm. We have power, we have rights, and we have to just keep pushing.
And the reason why I asked that too, because
Yeah.
I mean, he's done got away with so many things personal and in the executive.
100%, totally. I'm so with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Michael?
Could someone touch on executive orders addressing acts of Congress?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, are you referring to like, we're just going to, like the TikTok thing, like?
Or like Equal Employment Opportunity Act, I mean, there's a few that go after laws.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is another interesting approach to, decline to enforce existing laws. And I think it remains to be seen whether or not he's gonna get away with this. I mean, he did just essentially lay off all the DEI, right? I mean, I'm sure you're following just like we're following. We are gonna challenge every single piece that's within the ACLU's purview that we think is breaking a law. And we'll have to see. I will say on the Supreme Court, the ACLU has argued a number of cases before the Supreme Court and still won, almost half, even with this Supreme Court. So I think all hope is not lost. I'm not a defender of the Supreme Court whatsoever, but I think all hope is not lost, and we have to keep acting as if we have laws that mean something, acting as if our courts matter, and not let them take that away.
Are there any other questions? Saying none?
Thank you.
This administration is clear that they come after one of us, they come after all of us. The immigrant population in California is a very important population and a vulnerable population. So we do ask that if you have any more questions or later need more information, Cynthia and Aubrey are both available, and I'll share their contact information when we get the slides out. Our next speaker, Duke Coney, is a political advocate and staffer here, or a political advocate for our office at ACLU California. He's going to discuss housing and one of the most important issues, or some of the most important issues that arise with housing in the African American community here in California. Without further ado, Duke.
joined by my colleague, Rachel Bible. She's also a legislative advocate here at the ACLU. I work primarily on our criminal justice portfolio, but also co-lead our racial and economic justice team, which houses housing, homelessness, and different fines and fees related to legislation. Today we're going to be talking about housing. One of the other areas that we feel is a huge threat from the Trump administration is for him to come through on his threats to cut HUD. Housed within HUD are several important programs that California benefits from. Our local and county governments receive funding for things like rental assistance, different homelessness programs. A lot of that funding does not come from the state currently, and our fear is that at some point in this administration, those funds will be cut. And as we've seen in Southern California primarily, anyone can be homeless. Whether you make $1 million, whether you are an average worker, it can affect anyone. And so this is an area we care deeply about and we'd like to see addressed through the legislative process. So we know, unfortunately, we are most in this room intimately familiar that California is facing a huge affordability crisis, but also a homelessness crisis. And we know on any given night, over 100,000 Californians who are sleeping on our streets, some outside this building right here, unfortunately. And of that population of unhoused Californians, nearly 40% are African American, yet we make up just 6% of the population in the state. Immense disparities, and our hope is that through our legislation that we're proposing today, we can address that. Not only the disparities that unfortunately disproportionately impact African Americans, but do something meaningful to address the houselessness crisis as a whole. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rachel, who's going to be the next slide.
So we have seen this administration and the legislature acknowledge the ongoing crisis in housing and homelessness in our state, but what we are seeing is a very patchwork approach to addressing this issue. We're seeing investment in places like bond measures, which are very important and appropriate for many things, but they are not permanent, sustainable funding. We've seen COVID relief money be used for housing and homelessness. These are really important sources of funding, but California needs an ongoing, sustainable, significant investment in the full continuum of housing and homelessness services in order to address this crisis. We know that there are huge gaps, there are areas of the continuum of housing and homelessness services that we are only getting funding from the federal government on. And not only do we know that we cannot rely on our federal partners at this time for that work, we also know that our problem here is homegrown and local, and we need to be stepping up as a state to address it as well. And so in our work this year, we are really calling for the state to step up and invest, put its money where its mouth is, right? Invest the amount of our state budget that is really necessary to address how serious of an issue and growing issue that this is in our state. So currently California is spending less than 1% of its budget each year on ongoing investments in housing. As our partners have really laid out and done the full research on what it would look like to fully fund this continuum so that everyone had a safe, stable, affordable place to live, we need California to invest up to 6% of its annual budget in addressing our housing and homelessness crisis. And we need to stand up as advocates and as a state and boldly lay out what that will look like and what true investment means. And to highlight, Duke spoke about potential cuts in funding that comes from HUD. I think we all have to acknowledge we started out in the hole here in California. We were already facing a very significant crisis. Every day we're watching the situation in LA and the housing stability of folks down there being more and more threatened. We have not even yet seen what the Trump administration will do on this issue, but further, right? It's not just housing. When we see, as we expect to, cuts in public benefit programs and other entitlements, these are inherently cuts in those, the basic way that folks who are struggling to make ends meet every day are making those ends meet, right? And the more that all of our quality basic needs programs are being cut for our residents here in California, the tougher it will be for folks to afford their housing.
Yes, and
Sorry,
no worries.
forgot we had a clicker.
And that brings us to our solution that we're offering today, which is the California Housing Justice Act. And essentially, this act would establish a new sustainable source of funding that would fund things such as homelessness prevention, such as rental assistance programs, homelessness services, as well as affordable housing development. The goals of this bill is to address the cuts that we've been mentioning that could come from the Trump administration related to HUD and the funds that we see flow into our local communities. But also for us as a state to invest at the scale needed to meaningfully address the crisis. As Rachel mentioned, we've seen sort of a piecemeal approach. The governor has been great about giving billions of dollars throughout his administration, but what we found is this one-time investment is not enough. It might be great in that year, but the next year, those local organizations that have created programs that may be having success are not funded. So the solution is for the state to take a step forward and say that irrespective of who sits in the White House, we can take care of our community members. Irrespective of what happens at the federal level, we can still invest in our communities the way that they need to, at a scale that will do what's needed to get us at a place that we can support our in-house community and that we see progress ultimately.
So we by no means think that this is going to be easy. There's a reason that our state has not stepped up and made these investments to date, and we know that in the budget climate that we have, that the numbers that are going to be laid out here are going to be shocking. But that said, we have to step together as advocates, as staff, as legislators and leaders to step forward in the way that is necessary to end this crisis and stop sort of throwing water balloons at a giant target. We have to do this in a very comprehensive way, and so it will take everyone in this room and many, many people beyond to move forward the bold solutions that we need. So thank you so much, and we're open to any questions you may have.
Thank you. I have a question. You all use the phrase a continuum of housing or continuum of supportive services. Can you just tell us what you're referencing when you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea of a continuum of care in housing and homelessness programs has to do with, what is sort of the full suite of services that is needed and programs and structures that are needed to make sure that every Californian, every individual has a home and is stably housed. So that can be anything from how do we keep folks who are currently housed in those housing placements, how do we provide emergency assistance, intervention, to make sure that folks who are unstably housed never lose their housing in the first place, because we know that that is the best way to end the cycle of homelessness is to keep it from happening. And so it's everything from from kind of those early interventions all the way through outreach services for folks on the street, as well as folks who are inappropriately housed, so living in structures not fit for human habitation, living in abusive and unsafe situations for lack of other options. It's emergency shelter, transitional housing, interim housing, permanent supportive housing, market rate housing, discounted affordable housing, and really housing solutions for folks at every level of income, as well as every level of employment, mental health need, disability, and general circumstance, right? So it goes everywhere from the $500 cash assistance that will keep you from being evicted from your home, all the way to building structures for folks to live in and working with affordable housing developers to make sure that we have enough homes for the folks that we need. We're part of a campaign called the 1 Million Homes Campaign, which says, unsurprisingly, that we need 1 million homes in California to really move forward here. But yeah, so it's, and that's what we mean about, and thank you for asking that question, because that's what we mean about comprehensive, right? It's not just enough to say, here's a pot of money to support folks who are on the street with outreach, or here's a pot of money to build 10,000 structures. We really have to look holistically at this issue. Thank you all so much.
If you live in California, you know that housing is an issue. I don't know if it's warm here or if these issues are making you get on our educational system, specifically in our communities. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. Amir Reed.
Gratitude to the California Legislative Black Caucus for hosting us and for the work you do on behalf of the ancestors carrying the torch. And gratitude to the colleagues who introduced me to stuff. George, I did not know so much about fusion centers. As we said, my name is Amir Whitaker, Senior Policy Counsel with the ACLU of Southern California, and I'm on our education equity team here to talk about how this administration and their policies and their practices can impact the well-being and the success of our Black students and families specifically. And I'm gonna go through different numbers and stuff, but there's a tiny URL available here, and I have some handouts available as well. So why does this matter? So Trump has already vowed to end wokeness in his administration, end wokeness in education. And when you all hear wokeness, what are they using wokeness as a code for? Some of the things. Facts. Truth. Right? Just being awake. Being awake shouldn't be a bad thing. Being conscious shouldn't be a bad thing, but we're in an era where there's an attack on consciousness, and that begins in our schools, right? That a lot of that happens. So there's been pledges to revoke federal funding for teaching history, that literally teaching history. Diversity programs, they're already being cut. There's already some actions in the executive orders targeting folks. And then undermining of civil rights enforcement in schools. He's threatened to, eliminate the U.S. Department of Education, which houses the Office of Civil Rights, which investigates, bullying, which is most likely to impact Black students. LGBTQ plus issues and other issues that the federal government has to step in sometimes. I've filed many of those complaints where it's taken the federal government to come into a school district and force them to do right. Sometimes it takes a state to do it, but sometimes it takes the federal government. So programs to support Black students are already actually under attack in California schools. This was happening starting last year, really, and there's been successful right-wing attacks from organizations, parent right organizations based in DC and other places that are able to file complaints and undermine these programs. So Black students already face unique challenges here and throughout the country because of the specific history of discrimination and the continuation of oppression that is revealed in many statistics and different things that I don't have to go through today. But schools themselves have a duty to combat racial bias and to build inclusive environments. It's an affirmative duty they have to protect students. And oftentimes we see them not fulfilling that duty, but we also need leadership at the state level, reminding them of that duty and encourage them to do more. And we're actually honored to have a champion of education and legislation, Dr. Weber here, who's been for many years doing so much to impact students, all students, but especially Black students. So thank you for your work in this area. So racially inclusive schools and communities are critical for all student success. We want Black students to feel not targeted in schools, right, but making schools successful and culturally relevant and with great school climate actually improves the outcomes of all students. We see it socially, emotionally, and other things. And here, actually just in this room here 7 months ago, we commemorated the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board, which was a case filed 70 years ago last year here. Well, not here, but the ACLU was a part of it. And here in this room, we actually looked at 23 different indicators of student success and outcomes impacting Black students in California. And we found that Black students are still far behind in many of these indicators. So there's been decades of ACLU advocacy for Black students. That's taken a form of litigation, it's taken a form of legislation, organizing, reports. I've been at the ACLU for 7 years, and every year I've been there, I've published a report that's highlighted gross disparities with Black students, whether it's them being 6% of students and 20% of searches by police, or 15% of arrests, 15% of suspensions, 40% of restraint and seclusion. So that there's state violence in our schools where students are being restrained, and that's most likely to happen against Black children. So California still has more space to go. And actually, this is a list of just some of the lawsuits that ACLU throughout California and nationwide have filed, but you see the pattern there: Williams versus State of California, Doe versus State of California, Sigma versus Riverside, which Assemblymember Jackson was a part of that case.